Hi everyone, welcome to the 8 Steps to Financial Fitness series of workshops with Old Mutual. My name is Sichaba Gleba and I'm your host. We'll be taking you through 8 steps with 8 different themes leading to a financially stable life, the kind of life that you absolutely deserve. So last week we spoke about looking at yourself as an individual and envisioning yourself as a business. I loved taking myself through that because as a freelancer, I have to kind of set my financial goals and not look at myself as someone that is on a payroll or works for a company that gets a set salary a month. I literally am someone that goes out there, works per gig, per hosting event, per show, and have to structure my finances in a way where I look at myself as an actual business. So I've got the perfect person today. We are talking about creating stability with an emergency fund. And as we all know, 2020 derailed us. Some of us lost our jobs. Some of us had to endure pay cuts. I'm sitting down with Gontse Tsatsi, who's the head of retail distribution at Old Mutual Investment Group. Welcome, Gontse.
Thank you, Sichaba.
All right, so we're taking individuals through these different steps, and we spoke about looking at ourselves as businesses. But let's speak about 2020. 2020 was that year where I think every morning we all woke up and thought, could this be a nightmare that could end? We all had to dip into our savings. We all had to dip into our emergency funds. So how important is it, coming from a year like that, to set up an emergency fund going forward in your life, if you hadn't?
An emergency fund is really important, especially in 2020. And I want to just reflect on what 2020 brought. You had human impact. By human impact, I mean people becoming ill with COVID or people losing loved ones. You also had financial impact that people sustained, either losing your job, as you mentioned, or having your income reduced, or having your income removed completely. So an emergency fund is money that you've set aside to take you through a rainy day or an unexpected expense or an emergency. And clearly COVID and 2020 brought all of that to everyone.
Now, I think people sometimes blur the lines and get confused. What is the difference between an emergency fund and a savings account?
An emergency fund is basically got a timing element to it. Emergencies don't announce when they're going to come around. So you need to have a little bit of money set aside, and it needs to be fairly liquid so that you can access it as and when required.
Apologies to interrupt you, but when you say fairly liquid, what does that mean?
Liquid means available in cash. So you've got many options when you invest. You can invest in sort of fixed term investments or notice period investments where your money is locked up for a certain period of time and then you can only access it. Where it's liquid, it means when you call on the money or you need the money, you're able to get it.
Because that would be the issue if there was an emergency.
Absolutely.
You would need it at a specific point.
Yeah.
All right. So how exactly do emergency take you off track in terms of your financial plans? I mean, 2020 is a big example.
Yeah, basically there's a number of ways. The first is that it can cause you to dip into your medium to long-term savings. That's where you're saving for things like your retirement or saving for a home or saving for your child's schooling. So that's the first thing that it can cause you to do. And a lot of the times, if you go that route, you might suffer penalties. You might suffer certain taxes that are imposed for you to be able to access that money, which is no good. It can also take you, of course, by having to take on debt, which is something I'm sure Pat touched on in workshop 2. And all of those things move you further away from the goals that you want to achieve in life. Because when you set up your medium to long-term savings, you have goals that mean a lot to you as a person, that are important to you. And that's why you went that route in the first place. But now if you don't have an emergency fund and you have to go into those funds, it actually takes away from those things that are very important to you.
But if 2020 happens, you're having to think fast, you get retrenched, you lose your job, you're now dipping into your emergency fund. We're in 2021, we're starting the new year off with resolutions, we're wanting to get back on track financially. What would someone that had to dip into the emergency fund have to do to start off the year on the right track?
I think, first of all, you would have to try to replenish those funds that you've removed. And
immediately, or could you
I think over time. I think the one thing with investing that sort of scares people or puts people off is how rigid it can sometimes be made out to be. It doesn't have to be that way. It needs to fit in with your life. So I think the first thing that one has to do when you're considering setting up an emergency fund is to actually be clear about the need, that you actually do need this. And I think somebody who's dipped into their medium to long-term savings, that they will know, and it will make it that much more clearer. And then the next thing you have to look at is in workshop 1, Elise mentioned that we need to cater for all aspects of the financial wheel of life. I think starting an emergency fund is a good way to get the year off on a good footing. And there are a number of things that one would have to consider to be able to do so. The first, as Pat mentioned in workshop 2, is that we must always strive to make sure that all our bad debt is paid off in full and that our living expenses are kept as low as possible. That's a good start. Then I think the big elephant in the room, which is where's this money going to come from? So as a person, nothing sort of comes for free. Something's got to give. You've got to go into your finances and find or create the space to be able to save for your emergency fund. And a good tool that you can use for that is to be able to get on top of your expenses. Okay. One would have to look at your expenses, the things that you pay on a monthly basis, to see what those look like. And some examples that people are familiar with are things like your bond or your rent, the amount that you pay for your vehicle, for example, insurance, medical aid, those sorts of things. So trying to
downgrade in a sense?
Not necessarily downgrade, but just get a handle of what those amounts look like. Okay. And the next step, once you know what they look like, is we would advise you need to make sure that your emergency fund can cater for at least 3 months worth of expenses that you normally face on a monthly basis, but ideally for 6 months worth of expenses. And once you've got that, you sort of know how to go about it. If I had to use an analogy from sport, it would probably be taking aim or preparing, either by warming up or something like that. So it's not something that you just immediately dive into. You've got to give it some thought. How much am I going to need? Where is it going to come from, etc.
And we don't think about those things. So going through your expenses and going, would I be able to cover everything for 3 months? But to start with, how much money should one put into an emergency fund? Or should you start with whatever you can start with?
I think initially start with whatever you've got, with that aim of getting to a point where you're between 3 and 6 months worth of expenses, and you can build up. And I think the other important thing with investing that people sometimes lose focus of, we have good months and bad months as people. So in those months where you're having a good month, you can put away a little bit more. In those months where it's a lot tougher, what I always try to encourage people is to continue with the act and the commitment towards investing. So don't stop completely. You might reduce the amount, but at least you're still doing it. Over time then, it becomes something that's ingrained in you and something that you're used to doing.
And how does having an emergency fund complement my other financial goals?
As Elise mentioned in workshop 1, we need to cater for all aspects of our financial wheel of life. Your emergency fund sits alongside your medium to long-term investments. And the role that it plays is that it buffers or it protects those investments. Because what it means is when a rainy day comes along or an emergency comes along, you use the emergency fund instead of going into these investments. And I'd like to reiterate the point, it's important to have that there because those are, your medium to long-term investments are there because you're trying to achieve certain goals and dreams that are very important to you as a person. So you never want to put them at risk. You know, it's similar to again, if you're a sports person, having a shield or protective gear. It's really a protector or a shield to your long-term and medium investments.
And where do you keep the funds in your emergency fund?
Well, here we've got to consider a couple of things. The first is that emergencies are not going to announce that they're coming around.
That's what I'm saying. And I find that when we get advice from like financial advisors, lock it up, get a notice on it so that you're not tempted to go on holiday with the money. But when an emergency arrives, it doesn't announce itself. I don't think any of us expected 2020. I don't think any of us expected COVID-19. So the balance, where's the balance in terms of keeping the funds and being able to access the funds should an emergency occur?
Yeah, so 3 things to consider. First is emergencies aren't going to announce when they're going to come around. So the money can't be in anything or any type of investment vehicle where it's locked up. So no notice periods, no lock-in periods. The funds need to be available in cash as and when you need them.
And what would be the downside of cash?
I think the important thing to consider with your emergency fund is why you need the money. You need the money at a particular point and you can't sort of forecast when that's going to be. So that helps us understand that the money needs to be parked. By parking the money, it doesn't mean that the money should not grow. So ideally, you want to put the money in a type of investment that you can access as and when you need it, but also a vehicle that allows for some growth while the money is being parked.
But that you can access immediately should you need to.
Absolutely. You want to balance those two.
I do think the day-to-day ordinary person hears the word investment and goes, oh my God, do I even have the kind of money to be investing? You know, and I think that's the mindset generally that people have. So it ends them in situations where they're locking themselves in situations where they can't get their money immediately in the case of an emergency. So could you please just break it down to someone in terms of what's the easiest way to get information around an investment option that will be able to give you your emergency fund in the case of an emergency?
In terms of options for your emergency fund, I would suggest a low risk, short-term unit trust that has a track record of consistently beating inflation and one that has experienced limited or no negative growth. And I'll try and unpack that a bit. Low risk because the money that you put away, you want to make sure that when you need it, it's either the same exact value that you put in or slightly more. You never want to be in a situation where because you put that money into a volatile type of investment or a risky type of investment, that the value of the money dips below what you initially put in. So that's the first piece. The second piece speaks to short term, and that's obvious. As I mentioned earlier on, your emergency fund sits alongside your medium to long-term investments. So it sits in the short bucket here. That's why it's short-term, and you don't know when you're going to need it. The third piece, which speaks to constantly beating inflation. Inflation is a concept where 1 rand today will buy you less than what that same 1 rand bought you last year. And that's because goods and services increase every single year. What you paid for a particular product last year, you're more likely to pay more this year. So with that said, you've got a predetermined need, which is keeping aside money that will cover 3 to 6 months worth of expenses. And that's why you would go for that type of investment vehicle. It sort of ticks all the boxes.
So nothing too long term?
What you do is you replenish your emergency fund. So because the money is money that you're going to need in the short term or for an emergency, it can park in there it can be for a short while if you're not going to go if you are going to go into it and use it. But if you don't use it for 2 or 3 years, it's fine. I think the big thing for me when I was thinking about this is being comfortable with the need and what you're going to use the money for. That gives you peace. So whether it sits there for 2 months or 12 months, you're comfortable because you understand this is my rainy day money.
All right. Gontse, thank you so much for the advice. I think for me, sitting in the seat, it's enlightening in the sense that we don't really think about the vehicle that's going to be sort of housing our emergency funds. We're just thinking, I need to put my money somewhere, no thought going into it. And I know a lot of people are watching and thinking, this really made me think a lot. So thank you for the advice.
Happy.
All right, so I think the one thing that I took out from this specific workshop was that it is important to have an emergency fund, knowing where to put it and understanding the needs that it will cover. We'll be back with our next workshop. Thank you for joining us.